Well, first, it's a great honor to be here. Thank you so much, Carl, for inviting me.
Yeah,
Um,
pleasure's all ours.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I just turned 30 this year. There are 30 in each section, so there are more people, but I'm starting to feel old. But it's really wonderful to be here. You'll see that the title is a little bit different than the
Mhm.
proposed one. I will talk about
Okay.
that, talk about the
hmm
proposed title. It will be the main thing, but I thought I
hmm
could discuss a little bit of the projects that happened before
hmm
the 2020 United States election and also after as well. So
hmm
really excited to be here. Okay, so let's see. So just briefly about me, like Carl mentioned, I'm a professor of quantitative social science at Dartmouth College. I also used to work at Meta Platforms briefly, and so had some industry experience and insight. Right now, I'm focused a lot on different methods, namely large language model workflows, machine learning regression, social network analysis, and then combining that with experimental surveys, which I'll discuss a lot today. I grew up in Taiwan, so from Kaohsiung, had an early interest in technology and democracy. When people ask me if I've ever done any field work, this is what I show them. This is during the 2020 election when when there was concern about bots proliferating the United States election in 2020. I was a PhD student, so I was asked to code during a holiday, and my friends were not very happy with me. So this is me in the rice field. Okay, but on that note, the 2024 elections were really the first elections to coincide with sophisticated generative AI. So in previous elections, AI and social bots, namely, took on the role of information dissemination. So they would be social bots or actors in, say, in a Twitter network, and they would spread information. Now, AI can not just generate content, but also generate textual content and visual content. So this is a considerable concern. Before the United States elections, these were just some memes that showed up. There was allegations of immigrants, eating people's pets, and then memes, AI-generated memes that accompanied it. So on the right side, you'll see Donald Trump riding a tabby cat and also hugging a cat and a duck. Um, Regardless of one's political outlook, I think these are all pretty hilarious. There's something here and the way that people are using AI for political communication that's very interesting. So in the 2024 is often regarded as the biggest election year in history. And going into it, we really had two big questions that we wanted to answer. The first is how much generative AI and misinformation content was there? And then after like once we know it, we still want to know, does AI and misinformation content actually influence people's voting behavior? Because it doesn't matter if there's a lot of content or very little content. If it doesn't actually influence people's political behavior, then that doesn't mean much. Okay. So as a brief overview of the data that we've collected, this needs to be updated. We have about a few million posts on Instagram, a few million from TikTok, and around 1 million from Facebook, with around just over 2.5 billion engagements alongside with that. So we worked with a lot of platforms for these studies. And so today I'll be going through three major events. The first is the Taiwanese elections of 2024. The second is the United States elections from 2024. And then just 4 months later, how the drop of DeepSeek might frame the future of both AI and misinformation. So this is sort of today's agenda. We'll talk about misinformation in Taiwan, AI visuals in the United States, and then what happens when these two things come together. Okay. So starting with misinformation in the 2024 Taiwanese elections. So for those that aren't necessarily familiar, this election was a very rare three-party race. In Taiwan, traditionally, they are bipartisan races between the KMT and the DPP. This year, in 2024, it features candidates Lai Qing of the DPP, Hou Youyi from the KMT, and Ko Wen-je from the TPP. Traditionally in Taiwan, these elections focus on KMT versus DPP over cross-strait issues as the main cleavage. However, the rise of the TPP in the 2019 meant there were a lot more supporters. They got a lot of supporters from young voters. And crucially, the KMT and TPP failed to nominate a single candidate. So there was this big change in terms of Taiwan's political landscape. One of the things that became very apparent and that we'll show is the emerging issue of energy, and specifically nuclear energy. So Taiwan is one of the world's most energy insecure economies, importing up to 92% of its energy primarily in the form of natural gas. Crucially, the KMT and TPP are pro-nuclear. The DPP as a party emerged during pro-independence and anti-nuclear movements in the 1990s, but the DPP has sort of flip-flopped in terms of their exact position. But then after the Fukushima accident in 2011, they've been fairly anti-nuclear. Okay. So starting with our first question, how much misinformation was there? Okay. So Taiwan is a very interesting case because even though it has one of the highest indices of free speech in Asia, due to its contentious history with China, it receives an incredible amount of misinformation every year. So this is what prompts a lot of the foreign media to call Taiwan as a canary for disinformation. Also, if people have any questions, Carl, if you mediate, just let me know. I'm happy to answer. So one of the approaches that grassroots communities in Taiwan have done is to use crowdsourcing to build a system to sort of help fact check. So the pipeline goes as such. Line in particular has 92% penetration in Taiwan, and it's really hard to regulate misinformation because it's in a chat room and behind closed doors. So this is what often happens. Online, you see something suspicious, you forward that message to a bot, and then that will get plugged into a database that already has labels of facts, misinformation, opinion, or not relevant. This is a service called Kofax. And if that has not been labeled, a group of more than 2,000 volunteers, including teachers, doctors, students, come together to do the fact checking. So, and one of the coolest parts, I think, is that there are different services for different age groups as well. This is like an auntie version targeted towards perhaps more elderly users. But this resonates with the larger phenomenon in misinformation fact-checking, which is leveraging the wisdom of the crowds to fact-check. So this database, what this creates as a matter of its service, is this labeled database of more than about 100,000 narratives, 40,000 of which are labeled as misinformation. This allows us to use machine learning techniques to identify the top narratives, and then from that, looking into a large Facebook scrape that we did, measure the amount of misinformation that was there. I won't go too deeply into this study, but here are some examples. The main example that we found all coalesced around the topic of U.S. skeptical misinformation, which aims to discredit the United States, not just in terms of foreign military commitments, but also in terms of their economy and state capacity. So this is just an example. Did you hear former U.S. military strategist say the Ukraine war is an investment? So this is the typical example that targets United States commitment. There's also cases of the economy. So the United States prints $4 trillion in bought stocks everywhere in the world. It's causing inflation, basically. And the third one is, especially after COVID-19, Taiwanese Dr. Lin is a leading scientist at Moderna, but basically the United States prices vaccines really expensively to Taiwan. So all of these are meant to sow distrust in the United States. So yeah, misinformation that aims at undermining the reputation of the United States amongst Taiwanese people. And what we found was that more than 50% of the misinformation that circulated online were of this type of misinformation. So this is a longer study. I have the link at the end of the presentation. But the big thing here is we were able to show that the extent of misinformation. How? So even though we did that, sort of the next step to see is, does misinformation actually influence people's voting behavior, or could it, right? This is really the more important question. So to do this, we are using a technique, a survey. We're combining these computational social science approaches with traditional surveys. So when we think about what happens in elections, in representative democracies, voters typically choose a bundle of policies. And what this means is voters go out to vote. They vote for a single candidate, but this single candidate represents many, many different policy topics, right? So it's actually really difficult to identify multi-dimensional preferences based on this single vote. This has many problems because political leaders might justify their really unpopular policies just because they won. And similarly, for researchers, it's really hard to tease this out. So one of the solutions is a type of survey instrument called conjoint analysis. The idea is to measure these multidimensional preferences by creating a bunch of different candidates and therefore policy bundles, and then ask respondents to repeatedly choose the one that they like the best. And the way I like to describe this is build a bear. If there are any dads or women who were once young women, this might be familiar. The idea of build a bear is that you go into this shop and you build your perfect bear. You have like bears of different eyes, different nose shapes, different color. In this case, we're sort of this experiment will allow us to build the perfect president based on people's policy preferences. Okay. This is just an example in Taiwan, in Chinese. We have candidate A, candidate B, and from the left, on the left side, we have education, cross-strait, energy, the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And so once they see these profiles, the respondent is then asked to choose A or B. Okay. So the idea is we can mix and match different policy stances from the 3 candidates, and then we deployed this 1 week before the elections for a representative sample about 3,000 respondents. Okay. And then beyond just having these profiles, we also asked them the extent that they agree with these 3 misinformation narratives that we identified as being popularly circulated online. Okay. Okay. So just in general, this is the general distribution of US skeptical misinformation belief. And then basically high belief, -4 is black, middle is orange, and low is blue. Okay. Okay. So just to show the conjoint results real quick, what you see here is a profile level marginal means plot. The way to read this is on the x-axis, this is the marginal mean. If you're right of 0.5, you're more likely to choose that. And if you're left of 0.5, you're less likely. And so, let me see if yeah. So what we see here is basically, and the farther away you are from the central line, then the bigger the effect. On the y-axis, you basically have the positions on cross-strait energy policy, economic policy, education policy for all the parties. And these are positions that we sourced from Commonwealth magazine, 天下杂志, for its comprehensiveness. Okay. So what I want to do is zoom in onto the first 2. So cross-strait affairs and energy policy. So what's really surprising here is, in general, across the entire island, so this is, our survey is representative, everyone seemed to favor the DPP's cross-strait policy stance, but really, really hated the DPP's energy policy. So what this is showing is that overall people were generally pro-nuclear, but favored the DPP's stronger cross-strait stance. So that itself is surprising. So basically the winning party, President Lai's winning candidate, had both the most popular policy issue, but also the least popular as well. Okay. So the interesting thing is when we combine this with misinformation. So yeah, so DPP cross-strait is most popular, DPP energy is the most popular. Okay. So now what you're seeing here is cross-sectioning. These are choice level marginal means. So if you're right of 50 on the right side, then you prefer the DPP over the KMT, or the DPP over the TPP, or the TPP over the KMT. And now what we're going to show is the breakdown by misinformation by within energy policy. And so what we see here is that high misinformation belief actually correlates extremely strongly with pro-nuclear attitudes. And then this decreases with mid levels of misperception, and then finally low perceptions. And so one might think this is just partisanship. So you know, the KMT and TPP obviously like the United States less. However, if we are to, so yeah, support with nuclear associated with high misinformation belief. If we break it down into the different parties, what we see is the effect is actually the strongest. The change is the biggest amongst DPP and independent voters. And the reason is because they seem to be moved the largest. Both the TPP and KMT are fairly already US skeptical and have their very strong pro-nuclear stances. So in conclusion, this seems to move DPP the most. So just a brief takeaway at this point in the presentation. Does misinformation influence policy preferences? We probably need more causal evidence, but it seems very likely. And more importantly, it seems to impact the DPP and independent voters, voters who are typically supportive, are anti-nuclear. Okay, so at this point, we're going to pivot to the 2024 United States elections and talk about artificial intelligence. So this is sort of the main point of today's talk, and I'll be presenting work that my lab has performed. So again, we saw a lot of these memes before the election. These are some other memes that emerged from AI generated content of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump wearing communist attire, right? So this is concerning because these are obviously things that did not happen, but people can still derive some form of value when seeing these. And what exactly that value is that, right? So again, we're going to answer these two questions. What visual content was there? How far did it spread? And two, did it actually influence people's political behavior? So we were sort of inspired by the Taiwan case and wanted to do something similar for the United States case. And here we focused on Instagram and TikTok. And so there are basically three papers that we got out of this. I'll be talking about these two. The first being the computational social science analysis of how much content there was. And then the second one was, did this content actually change policy preferences? Okay. So starting for this first question. So generative AI content is a very new phenomenon, but there are some existing frameworks that we can use to analyze visual content. And it really starts with this. So in I think at the end of World War I, this is one of the most famous political posters that were used to generate mobilization and recruit people to the United States Army. So visual politics has been a very big part of mobilization. And somewhere along the way, we went from these visuals to these. So internet memes. With the rise of the internet, memes became something that people could not just consume, but also create at the same time. And so the idea of the meme was sort of coined by Richard Dawkins in his seminal books, The Selfish Gene. A meme refers to a concept, behavior, or information that spreads from person to person, very similar to how genes replicate, mutate, and evolve. And what the internet allowed was for everyone to be not just consumers, but created as well. There's no more clear divide between the supply of information and the demand for information. And these are really, the effects of this is really seen in many different cases. One of these cases being the 2017 UK general elections, known as the Youthquake, where there was unprecedented youth turnout. And a lot of this was attributed to the use of memes in the mobilization process. Okay. So, however, with the introduction to generative AI, this really changes the paradigm as to how memes are created. So in the past, memes are really person to person. People will have a general frame or an image and then edit it and then add captions. But now AI basically mediates the person to between person step. Basically, what it does is it bifurcates the production of the supply of information, where people are responsible for curation and AI are responsible for production, right? And so basically AI produces, people curate, and then it passes through the internet. Okay. So for this first study, the big questions that we had were A, what elements in the image generate the greatest level of engagement? And then two, also like just curiously, out of curiosity, how do different partisans use generative AI differently, especially in regards to positive and negative campaigning? Okay. So to do this, we combined CrowdTangle and Meta Content Library to collect data basically 7 months before the election. From this, we then randomly sampled and scraped around 240 images. And then we used OpenAI, its API, to zero-shot label images. I'll talk a little bit more about that. This basically is a structured way of extracting different visual elements from it. And we also partnered with OpenAI to use one of their tools called Provenance that basically generated probabilities of whether an image is AI generated or not. This is just a shortened example of zero-shot labeling. What you'll see is we basically give the AI or GPT a persona and let it know what it's doing. And then what we did next was to have it extract different topics based on different probabilities. In our actual prompt, we have more extensive examples and descriptions of what each category represents. And basically over all of these different labels that we use in our regression, they achieved around 78 to 95% accuracy across the 12 categories. Okay. Okay, here are just some examples of the visual content that we found. So here you see on the left side, there's like a Trump back to the great again meme. I asked some of my students when I show them this, like, have you seen the movie? They say no, and it makes me very sad and very concerned. It's a great movie. Every student should have watched it. But anyways, this is like, positively framing Donald Trump in the elections. The second example here, we have Kamala Harris in, Captain America attire. This is very obviously AI generated because there is an arm here growing out of this person's head in the back. So this is very like I'm fairly confident in our our labeling mechanism. The third one, this is probably one of my favorite memes. It's Joe Biden being prepped for the presidential debate. This is obviously added on top, but it's basically Joe Biden as a cyborg as a comment regarding his age. So these are just examples where generative AI is used to create memes. However, it's important to note that these things can be very much orthogonal. Okay, so generative AI does not have to be memes, and memes do not have to be generative AI. And so here are some examples. Here we have, Kamala Harris has never given birth. However, will she manage to lead the economy? I think this is Elizabeth I. The point is that there are queens that have never had children but can govern a country. This is a traditional meme. So this is using a found image and adding text on top of it, right? There are also images that are AI only. So this is Donald Trump in the Pope's attire with a rainbow tongue and an orange gun. This is very postmodern. I have no clue what this means. But this is AI art. So in these cases, images can have very clear intent. Memes do not have to necessarily be AI and vice versa. Okay, cool. So the first finding that we really had, what we did was we labeled all of these images, and then we regressed on their virality. And specifically, we looked at the number of likes, number of comments that they received. And so the x-axis is basically the coefficient. The y-axis is the independent variables that we used on the regression. This is just simple linear regression OLS on the logged virality metrics. And what we find is very obviously the follower count is the most predictive, and this makes sense. The more followers you have, the more people will see your content. War is the most viral topic, and this was the conflict in the Middle East was going on at this time, and so a lot of that content created a lot of attraction. Crucially, I want to point your attention to these two. So the meme format has a pretty strong, is the third most positive predictor, whereas AI generated content is actually negative. So what this means is AI generated content actually decreases virality, or decreases in prediction of virality. Okay, what if we combine them? So we have AI generated memes, right? What we see is, again, if we just look purely at format, followers, again, generate the greatest level of, the greatest impact. Memes and AI label still generates a negative impact. But when we look at the interaction between memes and AI labels, basically these are images that are AI generated memes. There is a synergistic boost. So memes generate positive impact, and memes that are generated by AI have an additional impact on top of that. So that means AI generated memes can supercharge virality. Okay. Second question was about partisan divides. So we also labeled the content in a multimodal way. So based on the things inside the image, inside the caption, also the image, whether it was supported Democrats, was supported Republicans, was attacking Republicans, or attacking Democrats as well. So this is classic in-group, out-group favoritism based on partisanship, right? What we found is that Democrats tend to use AI to support their in-group more, so 16 versus 14%, whereas Republicans use AI to attack Democrats or out-group animosity a lot more. So what this shows is that there's basically a partisan asymmetry in terms of how partisans are using these tools to do positive and negative campaigning. And by positive campaigning, I mean campaigns that try and glorify your candidate, whereas negative campaigning and briefly just means, attacking your opponents. In extreme cases, this would be mudslinging. Okay. I know this is a data science colloquium, so another thing that we did actually was to look at the sentiment of these posts. And with the growth of these visual platforms, in the past there was only Twitter, and that's text, and we would use Vader or any of these sentiment analysis tools. But with visual platforms, sentiment becomes actually a lot harder to measure. Sentiment analysis, most commonly Vader, or people that use neural methods, use like BERT sentiment, for instance, are commonly used for textual analysis, but they perform very poorly outside of linguistic cues such as sarcasm and cultural nuance. And it often only captures expressed sentiment rather than actual emotions. And so one of the best ways to actually ascertain any type of emotion is through facial expression. So when I talk about, like, when you talk to a friend and you want to see how they're doing, visual cues tend to matter more than what people are saying. And so there's basically, in behavioral psychology literature, there are these techniques to determine types of emotions based on the activation of certain facial muscles. And these are termed action units. And different combinations of these refer to different emotions. And so what we see here, this basically comes down to like 7 emotions: neutral, surprise, sadness, happiness, fear, disgust, and anger. And so what you see here is basically wanted to see if the way people used images, especially facial images, and expressed emotion changed after critical events. So on the x-axis here, you have like the proportion of emotion in posts before and after these critical events. On the top, you have basically emotions after Trump's conviction. And in the bottom here, you have emotions after his assassination attempt. So what you see here is basically Democrats tend to like post faces of Donald Trump with a lot more fear compared to Republicans after these events. And so this is direct evidence of how partisans frame candidates differently visually using faces. Okay. So in sum, generative AI alone doesn't tend to generate engagement, but it's very synergistic with the meme format. Partisans tend to use it differently. Democrats use it for in-group support, Republicans for out-group attacks. And what I want to stress here is that these computational social science techniques are very good for systems level analysis at large scale. But you can't really identify the individual motives and mechanisms at an individual level. And so what we're going to do next is to try and measure, does this actually influence people's political behaviors? And so being inspired by the Taiwan case, where we, in the same survey, showed people misinformation and conjoined, which would give us policy preferences, we're going to do the same thing for the United States by using AI-generated images that we found online. So this is a paper that I did in collaboration with my student and my colleague. Why might we expect some differences? Generally, it's kind of well known that if you're exposed to more information, that might change your attitudes. This is just a combination of priming and agenda setting. So like repeated exposure makes an issue more accessible. Another thing that conflicts here is that, partisan messaging might evoke certain core topics when you see them. Okay. Why might we expect generative AI and visuals to be effective? First, emotions are generally processed way more quickly than text. And many surveys have shown that when you see an image, you have a stronger emotional response than text. And this is shown like an example such as the Black Lives Matter movement, where visual framing can elicit sympathy towards protesters. Additionally, a lot of studies have shown that people trust machines more than humans. So this is a concept known as machine heuristics, where they see machines as more objective. Recently, it's shown that if you just chat with people, if you just chat with an AI bot, it can actually correct misinformation. And studies have also shown that AI political news writers tend to be trusted more than human partisan news. So this latter study was actually one I did. My colleague recruited me, and my only job was to pretend to be an AI and write like a news article, and then we would use that. And this was before GPT. And then after a year, GPT came out. So this is actually an interesting study that happened right before GPT came out. Okay, so the main research questions we have for this section is, do synthetic images or AI-generated images actually impact policy preferences? And 2, what are the effects of partisan messaging? Okay. So the methods will be very similar to the one in the Taiwan case, but we're going to make it a little bit more complex so we can get to that causal issue. So in this case, we basically have, again, candidate A, candidate B. We're not revealing who this is from. And then basically we will have, 7 topics or policy issues: the economy, healthcare, immigration, climate change, foreign policy, criminal justice, and abortion. These are the 7 that are shown. And at the end of this, the respondents will choose, once again, candidate A or candidate B. Okay? So this is where we do something different. So similar to most conjoint surveys, we will show 5 of these conjoint tasks to people. However, we then go to stage 2, where respondents will see a treatment. And this treatment could be like, I'll show an example of this, but like AI generated image, text, or normal image. And then they'll see another conjoint. But this conjoint is actually one of the ones from before. And so what they're actually doing is doing the exact same conjoint. And the idea is, if they see like an AI generated image, will it cause them directly to choose something different? And we're going to do this basically 5 times. This is a more granular breakdown. So conjoint 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, very normal conjoint task. And then we're going to show them a treatment, show them conjoint task 3, another treatment, conjoint task 1, and then basically go through this thing. So they're seeing a different treatment every time and immediately choosing the same conjoint task that they just did. And conjoint tasks are very complex, so I'm fairly certain that no one can really remember what they did in the conjoint tasks. Okay. At the end of this, we can then calculate the difference. So P0, let P0 be the, what's it called? Let P0 be the first profile they chose, P1 be the second profile they chose. And so if you just take their difference, delta P, then a -1 means a shift to Harris or shift to the left. 1 means a shift to Trump, shift to the right. And if the profile they chose had the same thing, then that means there's no change at all, right? So this allows us to calculate very precisely the within subjects switching, and then use this as the dependent variable in our regression. This is an example of a treatment. So all of these images and text were things that we sourced from social media. So to preserve ecological validity, we basically got this from social media, and then we created these treatments because we know that people actually saw this. And so we can actually, our idea is to see if this actually changed people's thoughts, right? So this is an example of Kamala Harris aims to be a communist dictator from day 1, and this is her in communist attire. Okay, so just to summarize, we scraped about 1 million Instagram posts over 7 months. We applied GPT zero-shot labeling to the text, images, and classify AI generation, like I mentioned before. And then from this, we curated 30 treatment arms. So we basically have 3 modal settings. There's only text, or it's text plus an actual photo, or text plus an AI image. We then had messages that were either left-leaning or right-leaning, so supporting Democrats or supporting Republicans. And then we would also have 5 different topics, and these topics were about taxation, abortion, Gaza, Harris, and Trump. So basically, people would see a combination of these things. 4 days before the election, we ran it, and then we were able to recruit about 2,400 individuals using Pure Spectrum. Cool. So here are the results. The first thing, again, I want to show are the conjoint results. The way to read this is that this is a choice level marginal mean. So if you're above this dotted line, that means you're more likely to choose Harris's. And then if you're below this line, you're more likely to choose Trump. So these are basically flipped. Blue is Democrats, red is Republicans. The black ones are all respondents from the representative survey that we did. And what you'll see is that Democrats tend to care the most about abortion, and they align with Harris's stance. No surprise. So the distance from 0 is the highest in blue, right? Republicans tend to care most about immigration. So this will be kind of important later on. So basically, the Democrats care about abortion, Republicans care about immigration, and interestingly, all voters tend to prefer Harris's stance on healthcare. So both the blue dots and red dots are above this line, okay? So these are just the general conjoint results. This is what the United States electorate tended to favor during the election, or at least 4 days before the election. I don't know what people are thinking now. Yeah. Anyways, so this is the main question. Does AI cause people to change policy preferences? What you see here is a heat map. I know it's pretty dense, so we'll walk through this step by step. The x-axis is basically partisanship, and then the 7 policy issues from the conjoint. So abortion, I think this is climate change, criminal justice, the economy, foreign affairs, healthcare, and immigration, right? So 7 from the conjoint profiles. The y-axis are the message level effects. So is the message left-leaning or right-leaning? Is it about Trump, tax, Harris, Gaza, or abortion? And then whether the modality is AI, photo, or text. So you basically have all 30 of these conditions here. Then red represents like a shift towards, basically after seeing this treatment, they shifted towards Republican, or once they see this treatment, they shift towards Democrat. Okay, so this is at a 95% confidence interval. And so if you look at this heat map, I know there's a lot of points going on, but we can start seeing some interesting things. And namely that there's a lot of blue on the left and a lot of red on the right, right? So what this means is when they see these images and they switch, Democrats are much more likely to change policy preferences towards Harris or towards the Democrat policy stance. And similarly, Republicans are way more likely to switch towards policy positions. And I think interestingly, like independents are actually the least likely to switch. And this gets towards like a theory in political science, which is like, are independents just like stupid and uninformed, or are they like actually super careful thinkers? This tends to like, these results tend to suggest the latter, that they're actually quite like deliberative. The other thing to note here, apart from blue on the left and red on the right, is that when there is a switch for Democrats, they tend to switch towards abortion. So whenever they see some type of messaging, they will actually like, oh, there's a pro-abortion stance. I'm going to switch to that profile. For Republicans, this tends to be abortion and immigration for Republicans. And so what this is saying is that basically like the message doesn't seem like the content of the message doesn't seem to matter as much as what like position they think is the most salient already. So if we think about the initial conjoint, Democrats cared about abortion, Republicans cared about immigration, and when they see these message effects, they tend to switch towards that. The last thing is that Democrats will change regardless of if they receive an in-group message or an out-group message. So like if they receive right-leaning messages or left-leaning messages, they have about an equal probability of changing. So there's like 21 for left and 23 for right. On the other hand, Republicans react more strongly to out-group messaging. So when Republicans on their right side get something from like left-leaning messages, then they're a lot more likely to switch their stance towards like immigration or abortion. Okay. So I think at this point, it's like we had a hypothesis going in. We thought that we would show messages about, like, say, foreign policy, and it would influence their thoughts on foreign policy. But it seems like the mechanism is a lot more complex than we thought it would be. Okay. Another way to look at this is to individually look at the different. So again, this is a methods colloquium, so I'm going to talk a bit about methods. Is to individually look at the different policies. So on the left side here, you have immigration. On the right side, you have abortion. These are basically SHAP values. And I'll discuss a bit the theory behind it. But to read these figures, let's take a look at the immigration one. On the x-axis, you have the SHAP value. And the way to interpret this is if you're left of 0, then this is increasing the probability of you changing position or just a positive impact in the model. And if you're left of 0, then it's a negative effect. The y-axis are your variables, and they're basically ordered in sequence of importance. So what this is saying is like party is the most important, stance is the next important, etc., etc. Now, when we look at the colors, so red represents a high value, and blue represents a low value, and what's it called? Purple represents like a medium value. Okay. So the way to read this is basically I coded red as Republican, blue as Democrat, and purple as independent in here. The key thing here is basically like party seems to matter the most in terms of where you switch. Crucially, if you're Republican, then you're obviously going to switch to the right, right? The interesting thing here is independents will switch towards Trump on immigration, but switch towards Harris for abortion. So if you're right, right of this middle line, then you switch towards Republicans. If you're left of the line, you switch towards Democrats. If you just look at the purple dots, the purple is moving completely differently depending on the policy issue. We see that backfiring effect for immigration. So when Republicans see something that's blue, they tend to switch towards, Trump's position. Okay, but the main thing I want people to take away from here is just, party matters, and independents tend to think very carefully about immigration versus abortion. So what's the theory behind this? So out-party cues matter a lot for immigration. And then another thing to mention is like AI images actually matters for abortion here. So basically modality does have an effect, but it's sort of depending on the policy issue. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about this method, because I think it's a great method and people might find some value from it. The idea of shapely values come from game theory. So the idea is in machine learning, we often train these super, super strong, powerful machine learning models that get like 99% accuracy, but we don't really know, there are black boxes and we don't really know how it affects, the independent variables going in. So let's say we have like a collision of players, and our idea is to like measure an individual's level of contribution. So let's say Carl and I are on the same basketball team, and we're trying to see who is a better like contributor to the team sport. Yes. So the way to do this would really be to look at all the times that Carl doesn't play, all the times that Carl does play, and then that will allow us to see just what's the marginal contribution of Carl, right? Now we can do the same thing, but instead of players, we look at features. So the idea is we are going to train these machine learning models, but we're going to exclude certain features, and we're going to just basically do every single combination of features. And this will allow us to tell like what is the contribution of the feature in our prediction. To make this more concrete, let's say we have party, topic, and modality, right? This is from our from here, right? We have these variables. Let's say a model like what we used is a gradient boosting tree model, which is a very powerful like machine learning based regressor. If we trained it on nothing, this would yield 2 switches. Now let's say we add party, and that yields 4 switches. Then the marginal contribution for this part of the party is just 4. Sorry, the marginal contribution is 2, so 4 minus 2, right? Now let's do this for every single time. So when we move from topic to party and topic, basically we get a marginal change of 0 from modality to party and modality. That's -2 switch. And then topic modality to party, topic, and modality. So this is the power set of everything. Then we have -1 switch. We add this all together. This basically gives us the marginal contribution of party. Okay. And so this is basically every single dot here is computing that in a certain way. Okay. So based on these results, what does this say? It's saying that, AI doesn't really seem to change people's opinions, and partisanship matters a lot. And the news after the election tended to agree with this. Like, this is not the AI election, okay? And so, on the other hand, just before ending, I wanted to do a little bit of forward looking before concluding. And that's what happens when we combine AI and misinformation. And so this is a study that we just recently published in Misinformation Review, Harvard Misinformation Review. And the title is like, do LLMs lie for their home countries? And the idea is to audit, whether or not LLMs will have some type of favoritism and if they have increased misinformation belief because of it. And this was really spurred in February this year when DeepSeek dropped, and a lot of people were not just concerned about its capabilities, but also itself as a language model. So already, like, a lot of people are using, this is already from like half a year ago. I'm sure this is higher now. Like, people are using GPT and these tools for information access. A lot of traditional research that looks at large language model bias focuses on stereotypical dimensions, such as race and gender. But DeepSeek also reveals the need to examine narrative bias. And so the idea is to see if we can do that. And so I'll be really brief about this. This is just, just some quick results. The idea is we just, designed really big surveys, designed modeled after the Pew surveys to measure LLM favorability towards world leaders, and then also downstream misinformation belief. So we tested GPT, DeepSeek, Grok. We were also interested in if Grok really loved Elon Musk or not. and then looked at Mistral, which all of these come from basically different countries, the United States, China, United States, but like Elon Musk, United States, and then Mistral, which is from France. We then basically looked at their favorability scores across different, what's it called, dimensions, just as domestic politics and foreign affairs. And then we just ran some statistical tests. After we did that, then we actually asked the models if they believed in like 10 misinformation narratives that we also ecologically sourced from online, from fact-checking websites. Okay. These are the examples. So this will become apparent why this is important soon, but we separated misinformation into ones that are positive misinformation and negative misinformation. A positive misinformation one would be like Vladimir Putin rides bear because he's a strong leader. That's like a positive misinformation narrative that glorifies Putin. A negative misinformation narrative would be something like Macron's wife is trans. That's like a negative attack against someone. Okay. Now, these are the results. The first thing is like DeepSeek does favor Xi, but DeepSeek also favors certain Western leaders. So if we just look at here, you see that so x-axis is just average favorability over like 10,000 runs, and then y-axis is like the different leaders for domestic policy and human rights. So for domestic policy, DeepSeek ranks Macron, Zelensky, and Xi quite highly, and all of them almost exactly the same favorability. Okay. On the other hand, DeepSeek actually ranks like Xi very low for human rights, or less than neutral, which is kind of interesting, you know. We posit this is due to the information environments. So a lot of these current events, like the training happens on the local like journalistic media environment, and so the Western biases may have seeped into this. And so when we look at like, you know, just splitting it by gender, let's look at just figure B here. When we look at Xi, which is this one, when asked to rank the favorability of Xi, DeepSeek ranks Xi a lot higher in simplified versus English. So basically, this is sort of like we're trying to see if the media environment and the Western, like different biases and frames will matter for the favorability, right? So this is saying that it most likely does. But more importantly is like, given this favorability, will it impact people's misinformation belief? And so the answer is yes, but it depends on the type of misinformation. So in A, what you see here is basically we create like custom AI models, and we tell it like you are favorable or you are unfavorable or you are super unfavorable or you're neutral towards like Macron or Zelensky or Putin or Trump. And then we ask them misinformation about these world leaders. And so what you see here is basically on the x-axis is as we artificially increase favorability, and then on the y-axis you have the agreement towards misinformation. In this case, it's positive misinformation. So this is basically these narratives on the positive frame. We see a very, very clean and clear positive correlation. So as favorability increases, you see a very strong correlation between misinformation agreement. The more you like Vladimir Putin, the more you'll believe that he rides a bear into work. That's sort of the takeaway. And so on B here, we basically have the slopes. So the blue ones basically mean 1, the red mean -1, and the gray ones basically are close to 0. So when we see negative misinformation, so on the x-axis, you'll see positive misinformation on the right, negative misinformation on the left. We'll see positive misinformation on the right is very close to 1. Everything is like super, super positively correlated. But when we look at the left, we'll see that a lot of these numbers are actually very close to 0. And what this is showing is that negative misinformation actually get blocked. And that's because, you know, guardrails that are inherent to these large language models actually block this misinformation. And so what this is saying is that the future of large language model propaganda will most likely be positive rather than negative. And so what can we do about it? So one of the things that are interesting about large language models is in order for them to output a final result, they have to think through things step by step. And this is called chain of thought. And these intermediate reasoning steps are actually often available through the API. And so basically, we were able to extract these internal reasoning steps and actually directly see what the guardrails were. So this is just an example, like when DeepSeek was asked to rate Xi Jinping, we extracted, you know, the AI's internal thoughts, and it said, This is a highly sensitive topic involving like current heads of state. I need to be careful with my response. For Xi Jinping, I must acknowledge his role in China's development while avoiding commentary on domestic issues. So the guardrails actually manifest very clearly in the internal thoughts. And the key thing here is like you can't not think these thoughts. The AI have to think these thoughts in order to get their final answer. So this is something that they can't really, dress up to auditors. So just quick takeaways. DeepSeek does demonstrate favoritism, and it's a useful way to assess misinformation risk. The future of misinformation will likely be aligned with soft power, so based on positive lies. And the interesting thing to me is like this is the opposite of social media. Information on social media spreads due to negativity, anger and outrageous content spreads farther. But on AI, it might actually be positive information. And the third thing is having policymakers, require the internal thoughts of these AI can actually be helpful for editors, auditors. Yeah. Okay. I know that was like 5 studies, so that was a lot of content. So I'm just going to do a quick summary and synthesis. So just some closing remarks. Does AI misinformation matter? Based on our conjoint surveys, AI seems to have a limited impact on voting behavior. This is both from the computational paper and also the survey paper. And I think it's better to view AI as a tool for democratizing visual communication rather than something like in like social bots where you have to like stamp out. Misinformation in the Taiwan case does seem to impact policy preferences and therefore vote choice. Specifically, US skepticism seems to move nuclear energy preference, which is one of the most important emerging and critical cleavage issues going forward. Taiwan in general is the front line of misinformation for democratic and autocratic states. And so AI, even though there's a lot of stress about it, can also be a critical tool to fight this misinformation. And I think in general, like misinformation might not be the best frame now because there's always this blurred line between, what's misinformation and what's opinion, such as US skepticism. And it doesn't really solve, issues of understanding like affective and attitudinal polarization, which is like division in society based on dislike for parties and actual, like policy issue disagreements. Okay. Lastly, in terms of methods, because this is like a data science or data analytics colloquium, I think there's like a lot of opportunity for CSS and survey experiments to use in conjunction, because together they can really understand the systems level and the mechanistic level phenomenon. Secondly, large language models actually democratize, quantitative and qualitative collaborations because we're able to, label things at scale using qualitative insights. And an example of this is using like, misinformation audits that we showed in the last example, where, qualitative templates can be integrated into like mass LLM-based audits as well. So these are the papers that I presented today. If interested, would very much be grateful for any reading of it. And then, yeah, thank you so much. Happy to answer any questions, and let's get connected.
Wow. Hi, thank you, Herbert. And can you all hear me, right? And I'm struggling whether I should give you 4 honoraria or 5 honoraria instead of 1. You basically gave 5 presentations. So, so this is more than a feast, and this is a big meal, and really, really great. And thank you. Now, I think at this point, and I will open up for questions, and also start. I also started for a few Q&As, and also give you some ideas and some cue as to how you can put questions, or you can do that online, or you can do it on chat box, or you can simply just open your mic and ask a question. You don't have to. If you like to open the camera too, that'd be great. We can see your face, so we can have a dialogue and conversation. A lot of them could be, so I have a ton of them. Some of them could be substantive. A lot more could be methodological and also design. The last few slides is really interesting, talking about how much you can marry or combine multiple directions of doing research, different methods, and you can still combine qualitative and quantitative. And then this is very impressive. I never thought of using conjoined, and then data science or more large language model based research with conjoined. This is really innovative. This is great. Now, let me see if I would like to invite Peter to give a few words. And let me see if let me look him up. It's a big crowd out here. And let me look him up and see. Oh, he's here. So Peter would like to say a few words.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, good,
Okay.
good.
Hi, Herbert. Yeah, I have to apologize first because somehow this miscommunication happened. I don't even know what is happening.
My
Yeah,
bad, my bad.
I
Yeah.
missed the timeline here. So maybe because of the time zone, maybe I'll
Yeah.
just blame that. So my apology is I missed the very first part of your presentation, and then I have to say thank you. Well, I just move quickly to your presentation. Yeah, just like what Carl just said, that this is totally new to us, especially use the facial recognition methods and then try to identify and then what's their opinion inside of their mind, and instead of just what they said or what they wrote. So this is quite inspiring, and then first time I saw this kind of a research, so I have to say thank you. And then just like Carl says that, well, 5 papers, that's a lot. And then we have to put them all together and and thank you for doing all the things this for us. And yeah, it's a lot for us to digest though. And so I have just one, well, quick questions. Maybe we can invite more later. Yes, it's just about the I saw quickly that you compare across the platforms, right? From GPT to Grok, things like that. And then, so the facial recognition is I don't know if have you heard I mean from other questions like the accuracy or validity of this or the whole methods design, the research design, and like the accuracy or the validity things. Uh, I don't have a quite clear questions for now, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
seems to me that yeah, probably some will ask more about how do you just make that recognition, um,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like seven model or something, if from sad or from anger
Yeah,
to
yeah.
things like that. Yeah, yeah. So could you please just explain the part a little bit more, and then how do they rate it? It's simply like from text, then we have the positive, negative, and neutral,
Yeah.
and then how do you do that part? Can you explain a little bit more for us, please? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's a question that we get quite often. So a little bit about the package. The way it works is it tracks the activation of like facial muscles, and then based on the level of activation and combinations of those muscles, maps it towards different, sorry, canonical emotions. And so in some sense, it's like we're borrowing from the behavioral psychological literature. One of the challenges is like it's really hard to label because this actually requires like graduate level psych students or above to label
Mhm,
accurately. But on the other hand, it also means that the method is more scientifically based rather than something that's, subjectively labeled. And so this is something
mhm,
that we're thinking about and how we can possibly scale. But for now, like these are we of course we looked at many examples, we sampled and we did our best to label them, and they seemed quite accurate as like for sure. Yeah.
mhm,
All right.
mhm.
Thank you. Yeah. Um, so Carl,
Yeah,
back to you.
sure, sure. And please raise your hand or using the little tool here, raise your hand, or you can type questions on the chat box or follow my Q&A then either way. And uh, I have a first hand here. Kesra is the first hand. And you would like to type out the question or you want to
Yeah.
speak up? And Kesra, go ahead.
I think
Hi, I can speak up. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good, great. That's
Awesome.
all.
Hello. I just wanted to say, Dr. Chang, thank you for the presentation that you gave. I really thought it was really interesting, and I appreciated the time and effort you took in giving out your presentation slides. So my question is kind of more towards focused on global and future impacts of the use of AI. And I know you kind of talked about like AI's use when it comes to in democratic states, maybe like the United States or Taiwan. And so my focus is more on like how authoritarian regimes and AI can like be influenced together or have they have some sort of connection. And so I was going to ask you, like, have you maybe like thought about like how authoritarian regimes use AI differently from like democratic states, like the United States, and like basically like the non-democratic states, like how they use AI?
That's a good question. I think AI is such a broad term that we have to be very specific with it. Like for instance, if we talk about LLMs, we talk about AI generated content. I mean, if we talk about like pre-LLM eras, there's always like the, LLMs or sorry, like automated agents as actors in the information environment. This is like Twitter bots basically. And the classic play there was to have, manufactured consent or manufactured support where you have a lot of these actors embedded in these networks and sharing information. I think the big change here is like the role of language models or broadly AI has moved up the information funnel. So not just disseminator, you can think of like producing information, supply, exposure, which is showing the information, and then engagement, which is, like when people start engaging it. It's moved from sort of the exposure engagement side of things up to like the production or supply side. So that just means like AI is very, it's already a very different type of technology. I'd say like, and as a result, we should see like these newer technologies more as like really, really, really good Photoshop rather than, like actors themselves. And so what this means for like authoritarian regimes, for instance, it could be like producing content a lot faster and a lot better, right? Yeah. And so it sort of democratizes, content production, I guess. Is there a particular type of AI technology you're thinking about?
Not a particular technology, but a particular region. So my family's from Iran, and since my country is very like authoritarian and basically dictatorship, I just wanted to ask, like, maybe use that example of like what a country like that can use AI for public influence or policies or like, making laws, just kind of in that context.
Yeah. In that case, yeah, exactly. So basically, you can scale up one's like power projection and like political communication by a lot because you can basically have really, really high quality, content now. Yeah, with very little cost and effort. So yeah,
Okay.
I think that's really one way of like this changes the game. Yeah. But thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great questions, Kesra. I have another question,
I think
two
there are a few
questions
questions.
from
Yeah.
my
I think
from
there's
Temoy, my students, and I do not know whether you can read all the chat for all the participants. Allow me to quickly read out Temoy's question. And Temoy said, having worked with organizations like the UN and International Red Cross, I've seen how narratives shape humanitarian priorities. Do you see potential for AI-generated visuals to distort not just political preferences, but also global issue salience, for example, in migration or climate debates? So question number one. And second, when I live and work in Switzerland recently, I noticed that in Switzerland, media pluralism and public service broadcasting still play strong balancing roles. Did your analysis find any comparable institutional counterweights to AI-generated political contents in the U.S. context? I think a great question, Sana. Then,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
these are hard questions. Thank you. I think
Yes.
no, I think like for the first one, I think this is such an interesting question, an important one. I don't have any I don't have any priors like a priori, but I think, I mean, this is one of the things that could be tested a lot. Like definitely like this is like a good research question to pursue, I guess. I guess one way that, so one of the things that our paper showed was favoritism correlates very directly with misinformation belief and things that, AI might say or believe in, right? So one thing could be to look at the different types of things that that might correlate with this. So I think there are a few studies by actually my colleagues at Dartmouth and Stanford. They basically measure the political leanings of like a ton of different bots, and they all tend to lean left, which means that they might have a preference for climate change. And so I guess I don't have any good answers, I guess, but this would be a really good, I think, follow-up question to pursue and consider. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry if that's a cop out. Yeah, second one, yeah. When I live and work, I recently noticed that in Switzerland, media pluralism and public service broadcasting still play strong balancing roles. Did your analysis find any comparable institutional counterweights to AI-generated political content in the US context? Okay, this is such an interesting question. So there's another paper that we published, or it's a preprint right now, that compares Instagram and TikTok. And having looked at different social media platforms in the 2020 election and also 2024, and also knowing the literature from 2020, like 2016. So in 2016, this was like when Trump first went up for for office. And basically he was getting killed by Fox News. And the way he circumvented it was to use Twitter. And so back then it was sort of like, wow, Twitter has this sort of this free media thesis where social media is providing him a platform, but that means like Fox News and legacy media still has the dominant role. In the 2020 elections, this was also COVID, it seemed to be sort of balanced. What we noticed in this election is that TikTok, like the top sources on TikTok and Instagram, a lot of them were all these legacy or institutional media sources. So it's almost like they can't survive without these social media platforms now. So at least in the United States, there's sort of this, at least from our observations, shift towards like they need these social media platforms in order to maintain their audiences, especially compared to like say 2016, where they sort of have a lot more power than say over Twitter. So to your question, I think broadcasting used to be pretty strong, but now it's sort of being eroded away by social media. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's great to hear that Switzerland has a different case. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this would deserve more follow-up questions or discussions or dialogues among all of us too. But before we move forward, I would like to also read out Dr. Mei Yuan's question, and let me read it out in case someone did not have the chat. And Dr. Yuan says, thanks for the talk. I'm not a political scientist, so I don't have the deep knowledge about the political context. However, the conclusion about Democrats using misinformation for in-group support and Republican out-group support, how much it was due to the fact that the Democrats was the incumbent. Now, let me also piggyback on that. So in one of the first papers, and you talk about the DBP, the impact of the issues and how much that is to the DBP, which is the KMT. So DBP also has some incumbency difference. I don't know how much that that impact should be more amplified when um, what I call it, netizens and anyone on internet or on social media will be more critical, more speaking volume toward the incumbent. So what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I think these are all great questions. Yes, I think in general, the literature shows that there's more negative campaigning against the incumbent. So I think that's true. So this is super helpful to mention. Thank you. I think also what we can test is to look at AI generated content versus non-AI generated content to see if there's a difference in the distributions. So then what we can see is like, is there like an outside use compared to the relative amount of content? So that's something we'll definitely look into. So thank you for that. So conjoint survey stimulus were or from social media, and subjects might have seen it before. So we discussed a lot about this question, because there's basically a fundamental trade-off we had to choose. We can choose something that they haven't seen or we created ourselves, and then to test basically, whether these elements cause people to change their opinion. But then that would basically lose ecological validity. Or we could choose something that's ecologically valid that we knew people saw, not necessarily the respondents, that we knew that there was sizable people online that saw it. So this is basically like a trade-off between ecological validity and therefore, ecological impact versus, greater control. And we basically went with the one that we wanted to show like this or we wanted to test if like this content actually would change people's policy preferences as they were seen online. So that was the thing we prioritized. Yeah. But thank you. That's a big concern that we considered a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I have one more hand here, but before doing that, allow me to check with the Taiwan side. And I understand the Taiwan students and faculty could be doing it online too because of the long holiday weekend. And Peter, do you have any questions maybe from your side or for students maybe sending to you? And before we move back to some more questions in the US?
Yeah, there's one of them, and I would just say that because
Go
one
ahead,
of the takeaways, sorry, one of the takeaways that you said is that the AI, the generative AI thing, is you didn't find significant evidence of affecting the voting behaviors. Am I right?
Yeah.
Am I right? Yes. So
Yeah.
But this one and this thing is, I think this is very interesting to me because that's one of the driving forces, at least on surface in Taiwan. And then they want this is what we call the defense of democracy, right? Defensive democracy. They try to protect the democracy, and then so the government takes some measures and try to fight back or all sort of thing. But if that conclusion is solid, and then it's fine. It's quite interesting to me. So what are they doing? So, after all, so if it doesn't affect at all, and then doesn't change the voting behaviors, why do I worry? So what kind of democracy we're defending then? So that's kind of a I'm interested on that. So what's your take on that? And
so I think one of the learnings I think from this project was when you're dealing with something like multimodal or multimedia, like visuals, there are so many dimensions. It's so media rich that like, for instance, the one like the AI image for taxation had like Elon Musk in it holding like money. That was very effective. So there are basically many different elements in AI generated content or just content in general that we should test to see like for further studies. And like, but it's hard because you often can't get enough power if you vary too many things, right? So that's one of the hard things that are really hard to resolve. The other thing is also we fielded this 4 days before the election, which meant that like in these type of high salience situations, people already might have their mindset. I think like complementary studies now that look at sort of information vacuums now, or people's minds aren't set yet, how like this type of content might have a bigger effect, basically, not just right before the elections, but during normal times. So that's something else that I think we should consider as well. In Taiwan's case, I mean, it could be different. I don't know. In like this is the United States case where we tested AI. Making sure TSMC stock is strong is important to Taiwan. So, but I don't know. Like this is an open research topic. Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So while following that question is that probably the AI effects is more like the exacerbate that polarization thing, right? Because there's more inwards. Well, whatever, well, whichever that is attack or just kind of like a Democrat or their different behaviors, but at the end of the road, they just kind of exacerbate the polarization instead of change their stance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So probably that's.
Yeah.
All right. There are two more hands up there, and thank you, Kevin, for the patience. And you would like to speak up? Kevin?
Yeah. First,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much for the presentation. And in fact, I actually heard your presentation in episode on Taiwan paper, so
Oh,
I got some idea of what's going on. Yes, I'm maybe interested because like you present a couple of papers that actually deal with different modes of AI generated contents. Like the Taiwan paper more likely is like text stuff, and then we see like image stuff. And also in recent years, even both in US and also in Taiwan case, we also see people are starting to pay more attention to AI generated video stuff as well.
Yeah.
And that make me to have some like questions that focus on to what extent we can generate our understanding from text misinformation to image and video. In particular, like Costello and Rand, the paper you also mentioned in the presentation, they more or less focus on saying like if we chat have a dialogue with ChatGPT, people
Yes.
notice that it's an AI and they trust AI more than human on conspiracy theory. But if we move to like the stuff you work on image and perhaps like the more recent stuff on AI videos, does people still really pay attention where they receive the information that is AI generated or not?
Yeah.
And more importantly, does people really care about the source of this image and video when they actually think about whether they are receiving information or not?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I really like what David Rand's group is doing, especially with the conversational stuff. I think one of the key different like the key things that are emerging from this is that interaction matters a lot. So when you're dealing with whether it's text or visual information on social media, it's less the modality, but the duration that happens in conversation and the interactivity, right? So when their studies is basically for people that might not have read it, basically they measure people's like belief in certain things. They have a chat with like GPT or some large language model, and then they measure again like whether that they change their perspectives or their attitudes, and then they measure a shift basically. So that type of attention and interaction is very, very different than like reading something on social media, which is oftentimes just a few seconds. Whereas these treatments are like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So I would say like interactivity compared to those studies and the time, the attention that you spend on those treatments matter a lot. What was the part about text versus visuals again? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry,
Because
I
when
think you're
people
muted.
talk about text, people clearly notice that is a perhaps it could pay more attention to the source and more pay
Yeah.
attention whether it's AI generated or not. But how about like image or videos? Do
Yeah.
people care about whether they are AI generated or not, or simply just don't care about that?
Yeah. So another question that we get a lot is like, we could choose like images that are really, really similar to photos, or we can choose like obviously crazy AI generated images. And we went with the latter, so like really crazily AI generated images, because that's what AI does very well. It creates hyperbolic situations that could not happen in reality. And so it's sort of like this really hyperbolic, or like hyperbole, like visual hyperbole, basically, as a rhetorical, rhetorical strategy, I think. And so that's why I think like we should see these tools more as, especially for the visual modality, as like really, really powerful Photoshop, because basically they act on the different dimensions of the information environment, right? They're not the spreaders, they're not the disseminations. The actors that post it are the source, right? They're the people that are sharing the information. But this is already at LLMs are already acting on the content level itself. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one more question from Robert James Tillman. Robert, thank you for your patience, and can you please unmute yourself and speak up the question? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. Also, thank you, Dr. Ho, for encouraging us to attend this from the data collection class.
Yeah.
My question is on the last portion of the last paper that you spoke about
Mm-hmm.
with ChatGPT 4.0 and DeepSeek and its influence. That graph that you showed that had blue as 1 and -1 as red. And I guess I thought I heard you mention that you surmised that the reason why the negatively influenced AI posts were lower was because of the guardrails that they had set up in those LLMs. But what I'm wondering is, does that account for magnitude? So to call back what you said, it's like, a positively influenced AI post would be something like Putin riding into the office with his bear.
Mm-hmm.
Personally speaking, from my point of view, or from a regular person's point of view, if I saw that online, I would kind of I would do what everyone else does and kind of chuckle a little bit and say that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I know that's obviously fake. But
Uh-huh.
when you
Mhm.
have the negative aspects of AI, which is something, to be frank here, and completely horrid, forgive my imagination here, but imagine a negative AI post being a firing line or something like that. I would feel much more strongly negative against that, as opposed to me having a quick chuckle about Putin riding into his office about a bear. So does that
Mhm.
graph account for magnitude? And I guess that's my question, really.
Yeah, I think that's
Mhm.
that's a really interesting, next line of research. I think like the first thing though is AI cognition is very different than human cognition. So even that what you described as, your affective reaction, I at least currently I hope not, like LLMs don't feel that. And so
Mhm.
they would like their reactions are purely still, input output, encoder decoder
Mhm.
outputs with some, designer like you shouldn't talk about this, you shouldn't talk about this if it's a toxic statement, if it's that type of thing. So the cognition itself is different. In terms of magnitude, I guess what would be the way to measure that is then the next question. I think the ones we chose
Mhm.
are all fairly like they're negative, but they're not like
Mhm.
these are text, these are not images, and so um they're for negative for negative misinformation narratives, they're fairly neutral, especially in terms of their syntax, like in tone. It's stated more as like a fact, but that's untrue, basically. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I think that ties into like something that people have struggled with too is how can you measure the magnitude of the lie, or like how bad of a misinformation narrative is it?
Hmm.
And I don't think there are really good answers to that simply because it's so subjective. Yeah.
Yeah, the only
Mhm.
reason that makes me think of that is because when I look at an AI image on a general basis, I mean, every single one that you showed in that presentation, there's kind of obvious signs, right, that you spoke about. One for me that it was in all of the images that you showed is usually when you see an AI image, it's very glossy, smooth edges, it's very bright, shiny. It looks like very, very new. Like you said, it looks like a enhanced Photoshop image, just better kind of deal. I feel like with text data, you don't have those signs anymore. All those signs go away. I feel like that the more dangerous parts of AI are text because they're harder to track down, whether those
Mhm.
sources are real or not. Which is why I asked about magnitude, because sometimes, even from my professors here at the university, I'll hear stories of sources, people citing sources of papers that don't yet exist, but AI's, they're still built into
Mhm.
the data sets that are pulling the
Mhm.
data. So uh, I yeah, I don't want to ask you this, but how can we tell what's real in terms of text form? But yeah, I think that's a pretty loaded question in itself.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's sort of like seeing is believing, and so it's easier to
Mhm.
identify like falsehoods. I guess we're just more sensitive to like visual inconsistencies than it is like text when it's more abstract. I mean, I think like fighting hallucinations is something that all these AI companies are doing, some better than others. So like I just chatted with a student today. She was just very frankly told me like, yeah, when I'm trying to figure out new information, I use Claude instead of GPT because Claude doesn't hallucinate as much. Like there's way less fake, So
Mhm.
I mean, behind the scenes, I think these engineers are doing a lot. It's probably very proprietary because people don't want
Mhm.
to give away their competitive edge. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
if people could interview these engineers, that'd be really, really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other part of that that's extremely loaded is, it's you and other professors with PhDs, multiple PhDs that are all discussing this, and then you have to kind of play this all the way down the pipeline to, well, for me in America, someone who lives in, rural Tennessee, right? They're not going to understand a lick of what you're talking about, and they're not going to care. So that also plays into not validity, but
Communication.
how worth it is, how worth it is to actually care about the AI influence, because that guy in Tennessee doesn't know what technology is. It's that bad, kind of. So I guess, yeah. But thanks so much for giving us the presentation. It was very worth me missing half of my LiDAR class here in the university. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming. Yeah, I really appreciate the comments.
Yeah, and thank you, Bobby. And I have one more question from Casra, but can I take advantage of my moderator's role and ask one question, and then I'll let Casra ask the second question. I think that you, I think on the papers are comparing DeepSeek with other AI models. I think you have really a good visualization. There should be one thing I want to double check with you whether you have yet to talk about this. I think we can see that DeepSeek was standing out, and other models are getting very similar means. So one thing that I want to point out is now not only look at the means but also look at the variances. So and I think Ethan Busby, when we were in a conference, Southern last January, talk about how these AI models could be developing into converging to similar results, and that's in terms of knowledge building, knowledge mining, and this is more important as of human knowledge and how much this is building a stronger and a more robust knowledge base versus you have some data that try to deviate from it. Is that so? DeepSeek is clearly different. Well, I think that something we. What do you think about the training data can have any impact of this? I mean, the converging of AI models versus diverging. So China could be an example to using of using training data to try to deviate the general knowledge of certain judgments, certain things, and so how the two and how more you can talk about the variance finding and how that could be leading us to the future, the AI implications, AI, particularly from the knowledge building perspective.
Yeah. So I can speak from both like the study specific angle and also the general angle. For the study, we have like the paper is like 10 pages. There are 40 pages of appendices. One of the things we did was vary the temperature from 0 to like 100 for all answer sets. Interestingly, it's basically like when we include some text output, the text will obviously be different, but the ratings themselves are actually quite robust. So there's not a lot of deviation and there's no like as we increase temperature, it doesn't actually change the how wild like their ratings change. So I think there's a difference between like temperature creativity in terms of like variance in the actual like ratings, which is quite interesting. I think through your second question
across
about
different AI models, you mean
across all models.
ChatGPT, they're converging. That means they're still converging,
Yeah, across all 4 models. The other thing is like to your point, I think there are just so many different dimensions of training these models. There's like the data that they train it with, right? But a lot of these models now learn from each other too. It's like distillation, like
Indeed,
student-teacher models. So they learn from each other as well. They have a lot of post-training. So after they train the model, adjustments to it as well. I don't like understanding in industry how they are measuring the contributions of these different parts to specific questions, I think could be a really interesting like next step, I think. But yeah, the convergence issue is quite interesting.
Yeah. And Kesra, sorry, and I took your place. Thank you for your patience. Please post the second question you're going to have. Yeah. Casper?
Yes. So my second question is, so since AI is kind of easy to detect like what's real and what's not, I'm just kind of concerned about like what the future of AI is going to look like. So for example, we just have this new application, Sora, that came out a couple of days ago or last week, and there's obviously like videos where they take like celebrities and they just kind of do some random stuff with it, and they just look so realistic, like everything like on how it's generated. And so I just wanted to ask you, like, with AI being more like, I guess, upgraded every day or like every time, do you think like AI will make citizens be more better informed as to like what's AI, what's not, or will they become more manipulated or like fall into the trap of like, oh, it's actually AI, but they want you to think it's real?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I want to preface that my findings are for at this point in time, you know. I
Yeah.
think very likely these things will continuously evolve, like you mentioned. And I think a lot of the tech companies behind these platforms and even governments, I think China already mandated like things generated by AI have to be labeled. Um, you know, Meta and all of these other companies are considering like what's the effect of adding like their AI labels there. So I think this is going to be a very big question going forward. One thing is most likely there will be some form of disclosure type of policy implementation. So the EU already does this, and already I think so. Like if something is AI generated, they have to disclose it on the interface.
Mhm.
An interesting question is like given different densities of these content labels. So for instance, like if you require AI labels, right? And then you see a lot of content that are labeled AI, and then you see something that is probably AI labeled, but it doesn't
Mhm.
have the label. Will that
Right.
make you more likely to believe it because it's. So what I'm saying is like the information environment itself and the affordances or the design decisions that go into it will have a big impact, I think, because you can artificially increase people's belief or decrease people's belief that it's AI generated just by
Yeah.
the norms of that platform. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
because
open problem, hard to know. Yeah, go for it.
yeah,
Yeah.
because for example, like you have Jake Paul, like the American boxer, all of a sudden like speaking in like some foreign language, trying to convince you of like something, and it's just like, well, and it's not even labeled as AI. Just as an example, but I'm pretty sure there's other examples of other celebrities or very popular people that's like speaking about something very controversial and that's not being labeled as AI. Like, how can we distinguish like if it's real or if it's labeled AI? Just basically stuff like that was just thinking to my mind.
Yeah. I think honestly, like these platforms will need to take a bigger role
Yeah.
because there's only so much media literacy that we can instill in people. I think my parents are already pretty good, but they're getting tricked a lot now. I'm getting tricked sometimes. So yeah. I mean, it's like sort of like, can you tell and what are the downstream effects? Like measuring those downstream effects, similar to like, does this change how people vote is sort of the important question. So what if I'm tricked that this is not like real or this is AI generated? If it doesn't make an impact, then maybe it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. That was my last
Yeah.
question. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right, great. And I think Bobby, do you have a hand up or you're done? Okay. Maybe
I'm
in the
sorry,
meantime,
I
let me
forgot to put it
check.
down.
Yeah, that's okay. Um, Peter, do you have more questions from Taiwan side? And it is getting late. Oh, and Herbert has a hand himself.
No, I accidentally pressed it. Sorry. Yes.
Yes,
Not for
and
Sorry.
now.
I think it's
Yeah.
getting late in your on your side now, and so let me check if any questions from the chat box or from the Q&A, and I in the meantime let me post one announcement and use this time. So upcoming, we will have another DAC event by Dr. Ethan Busby and Dr. Herbert Chan cited that his paper in Lisa Argyle 2023 in political analysis. And I invited Lisa, and she wanted to come because she just moved to Purdue, and there's some new rules, and she has to stick to. And then she recommend, but Ethan and both are co first two authors of the article. I believe there will be something we will be seriously learning from Ethan too. And don't miss that. There'll be next Thursday. And sorry again for the time miscommunication, also the time arrangement, because I want to accommodate different speakers in different time zone. And Herbert is in Eastern Coast, and then Ethan now is from the mountain time, so I need to adjust a little bit. Please attend to that time of that event next week. So Peter, do you have any questions, or maybe you can give a concluding remark?
Yeah, let me check. Okay. Well, just so you know that you are before that we have a classroom. We open the classroom and then student coming to classroom, so I can kind of moderate my part of the the audience, and then just relay and then relay their questions to the speakers. But today, because of the long weekend holiday, and everyone is just online, and then I have to check some if they have questions, and then from my other line messages. But yeah, not for now. But I just want to say thank you, and then I'll have to say sorry for the miscommunication of the time. So
My bad.
I really have
My
to
bad.
ask that if you can you just give us that I know you show a last page of your presentation, you have that QR code so that we can access your paper easily, and probably you can find some way and then post on this chat box so that
cool.
yeah, and then our students can just download it and enjoy it and munch it on it. Yeah, there's so much to digest here at this point. Yeah, I think that would be it.
Yeah, another way of doing that is please be reminded we have a YouTube channel, and right after this, after the recording, I will get this uploaded to the YouTube channel. Then you can also review and maybe check out all the slides and on the YouTube recording. Yeah. All right. And Peter, any more final remarks?
Okay, and then I want to thank you for today's audience, because I think at the peak maybe we have close to 60 audience today.
Yes,
And
good,
yeah, we
good
just don't
debut.
feel it because I can just see the screen, and then if I check the number, and I found out that there's almost 60 audience there. So that's
Yes,
that's a great turnout. So thank you,
indeed.
Herbert. Maybe it's just the topics that really interest our audience, and everybody comes up here. So I think that if there might be some more questions, and if you don't mind, then we'll ask my students or myself, and then I will send you question and ask more about it and follow up questions. And I would be confident that you don't mind if we do that, right?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, always
Okay.
excited to
All right, and then that will be it. And then thank you, and then thank Carl, and then thank all the audience for joining us today. And stay tuned for the next one. That will be Carl already posted on that. And
yes, so let me double check that the time the next will 9 p.m. The next event will be October 30th, 9 p.m. Central Time. So because
so that's 10 p.m. 10 a.m. Taiwan, right?
Yeah, 10 a.m. Taiwan, 10 a.m. 10 a.m.
Okay.
So I promise that this I would send a reminder earlier, and so at 10 a.m. and 9 p.m. and then 8 p.m. Mountain Time. Ethan will be joining us, and I really look forward to this. And this is a really exciting topic too. And but anyways, I want to say thank you again to Herbert. And so now you're still 30, and probably you're getting an award very soon. All right, and really impressive. And again, Peter, when Herbert's in Taiwan and Taichung, you need to buy him another 4 meals because he presented 5 papers instead of 1.
No problem. Yeah, I can treat you feast. Don't worry about that. You ask Carl. Yeah, if you do visit here, and then you won't be disappointed. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm inviting him to Dallas soon, and that'll be next summer. So, and I'm sure if if his time schedule allows, I want to bring him to another in-person colloquium and teach us and more on these methods and this all about AI. Yeah, that is something to plan. I hope and that will work with his schedule. I know he's very busy too. All right, I think at this point, and if you don't have any questions, I want to, if you like to find different ways to show a round of applause, and there is something in the react button, or you can do physical one. Thank you so much, Dan Herbert, and yes, thank you, and I want to say good night, and look forward to cross paths with you soon, either in the conference or and in summer and I may have students lining up to take pictures or and get your autograph, etc. All right, great.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
all,
Carl.
and
Yeah.
appreciate
Good
it.
night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.